Good news, students, I've just invented a new word, plagiarism. Right then, today's video we're going to look at the lower course features, landforms resulting from deposition, I should say. Levees and floodplains relatively straightforward, we'll explain those together. Estuaries a little bit more complicated. We'll join them together with our example of a river valley again, which is of course the River Foy. Just a reminder where you're going to find these features, floodplains, levees and also estuaries found in the lower course. Just joining the middle and lower course together quickly, remember absolutely crucially that in the middle and lower course the river will run faster than it ever did in the upper course because of that hydraulic pressure of all those tributaries adding more water and shoving or pushing the water through faster at a greater velocity. As a result with that, we find landforms associated with flooding in this area. You'll see a little bit more of the reason why in a moment, linked to just the natural geography of any area nearer the sea. In addition, you're also going to find some features here linked to deposition, both in terms of river flood, but also in terms of the estuary itself is just a little bit more complicated. You might find some smaller features there due to the sea's influence on the river. Alright then, floodplains and levees is an example from the River Foy. Hopefully you can see the floodplains either to the right or left of this image. Just to go over quickly, found in the lower course, the land adjacent or next to the river is much flatter because we're approaching the sea. It's becoming closer to sea level. As a result, this means the river is more likely to flood as the land itself next to the river is lower to the ground. So therefore it means floods more likely to occur in the lower course. In addition, you've also got a lot more water being added throughout the river's course itself, so a lot of water arriving in the lower course means it's more likely to flood here. So floodplains and levees from this diagram. I didn't point out levees on the previous image, apologies for that. You can see them here. They are both formed by deposition in times of a river flood. At the point in the lower course, or actually throughout the river is carrying a lot of different sediment or load in terms of weight, in terms of size. As a result, when a river floods, it will drop these in order of weight. However, as soon as a river breaks out of its river channel, it slows very, very, very quickly due to friction with the grass banks. In the lower course, you actually have quite a smooth river due to the amount of abrasion that has occurred throughout the history of the river. So as soon as that water breaks out of that, it hits the grass on the banks on either side, and the water itself slows down very quickly due to friction, and that means the water cannot carry its load anymore. And as a result of it slowing down, it will drop the heaviest of those particles first, your boulders, your pebble-sized items, which will form the levees. And the levees, quite simply, are the I guess they're grey on the diagram. It's load that was previously in the river that is deposited when the river floods, and it builds up a mound either side of the river. Now the flooding water can actually, the flood water from the river can actually carry sand, silts, clays, smaller and less heavy items further, with the sands being deposited next as they are more heavy than the silts, and finally the silts and then the clays will be deposited further away from the actual river channel. Now, crucially important with the floodplain is every time the river floods, it actually builds up the level of the floodplain. Now then, as those floodplains build up, they are used by farmers because the soil is incredibly fertile due to the deposition of silt, clay and alluvium, and in addition the land is also relatively flat, which makes it easier to plough, so farmers will use these areas. The key thing to remember with floodplains and levees is that they occur when a river floods, when a river bursts its banks onto areas of land that are usually dry. Therefore, or just after that point, the river will the floodwater will slow very quickly. It doesn't have that hydraulic pressure pushing it through the river channel as it did previously, and as a result of that, it will deposit and drop its load because it simply cannot support its weight anymore. So that's floodplains and levees. Okay, estuaries a little bit more difficult. Estuaries also found in the lower course. Estuaries have formed across the UK really since the end of the last ice age, with a rising sea level essentially encroaching into rivers formed due to melting ice on the land. Now actually the River Foy was not formed by melting ice on the land. The River Foy was actually in an area where rivers would have flowed in summer during the Ice Age. However, the increasing sea level as ice on the land melted has meant the creation of an estuary, which is a transitional zone between river process and coastal processes. In the simplest possible terms, estuaries are a tidal part of the river. It's a part of the river where seawater can inundate the fresh water, and you end up with something called brackish water at that point, which is a mixture of salt and fresh water. During a rising tide, the water from the river is not being able to be discharged into the sea, because essentially it's almost being held up by the seawater encroaching in, and as a result its load, if you will, cannot be carried any further because the river is being slowed down by the sea, and this means you get a large deposition of materials here, because quite simply the river's velocity is being lowered because the seawater is essentially pushing the river water back. As a result of this, you get deposition. You often find mudflats here. You can actually see those on the River Foy. So just to recap, estuaries are a tidal part of the river formed due to a rising sea level, and essentially it's an area of deposition on the basis that a rising tide slows down the river water, leading to deposition. Great news for your example, all of them are found either in the town of Foy, on the banks of the town, or actually within the river in the case of the estuary itself. So the River Foy, a brilliant example for all of these. Anything you're not sure of, come and see us down in H8. I can certainly go through estuaries with a couple of diagrams on the board, but hopefully you should get your head around the lower course features, remember, formed by deposition due to flooding.